so I feel more comfortable. But hi, I'm Brenda Dick, the Executive Director of Gorton Community Center, and this is absolutely one of the highlights of our year. I am so pleased that you are here and welcome you to Gorton, so thank you. This is the inaugural Greater Good Project, which is an exciting new venture for Gorton. It's a leadership program designed to inspire, educate, and empower our local civic nonprofit leaders and strengthen your mission. Because I know that all of you who are seated here tonight are involved in making our Lake County, our Illinois, better than it is today. And it's extraordinary that you are taking your time. I know how valuable it is. And to be here tonight to be part of the Greater Good Project. The project includes tonight's keynote address by Jake Harriman, followed tomorrow morning by Jake's hands-on forum for nonprofit decision makers, where they will discuss challenges and plan for systems that enhance their mission-based work in Illinois. And I just want to explain that this is something quite unusual. This isn't just a time to be inspired. What Jake is going to help us do is move from inspiration to action. And that is really the hardest thing. I think everyone in this audience has been in a place where we have been uplifted by amazing people. But what's really hard is to go back to your desk and get the work done. Yeah, I hear laughter out there, I know. I mean, we've all been there. Gorton works because of people like you. And in fact, our county and our state are going to work because of people like you. We appreciate the expertise and the many hours devoted by the Greater Good Project by our steering committee, led by our chairman, Maya Armour, who will introduce our speaker, Andy Duran, who is head of LEAD, Sarah Lamphere, a board member at Gorton Community Center, and Peg Detterman, who you all, and I do this wrong all the time, it's Dieterman Detterman. Help me, Peg. But Peg is just an incredible force in our community and a former president of the Lake Forest Caucus. A special thank you to the Deer Path Inn for inviting Nauru staff to be their guests. I will say I just wish they were here because, as we all know, it is an amazing feat that they have done with the Deer Path Inn. And Jake came up to me, and of course he's been in the wilds of Somalia and everywhere else, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I have never stayed in a place like this." And I said, "Well, if you'd stayed here a year ago, you wouldn't have thought so." But the Greater Good Project is made possible through the generous support of the Granger Foundation. We appreciate the Foundation's focus on the challenges that face Lake County and Illinois, and the action that they have taken to help us successfully meet our community needs. And with this, I would like to introduce our chair, Maya Armour. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Good evening, everyone. Well, it is my pleasure to have the just absolute honor of introducing our keynote speaker tonight. Jake Harriman graduated with distinction from the U.S. Naval Academy, and he served 7.5 years as an infantry and special operations platoon commander in the Marine Corps. He led 4 operational deployments, and he was awarded the Bronze Star for actions in combat. These experiences convinced Jake, and if you've read his bio, if you've looked at the program here tonight or done your homework in advance, these experiences, you'll see, are what convinced Jake that the war on terror would not be won on the battlefield alone, but that the contributing causes of terrorism, specifically extreme poverty, must also be eradicated. So upon leaving the military, Jake enrolled at Stanford Graduate School of Business, and he founded Nauru International. And since 2009, Nauru, Kenya, and Nauru, Ethiopia have enabled over 85,000 people. Now that's over 10% of the population of Lake County. 10%, 85,000 people to lift themselves out of extreme poverty. And tonight, Jake is sharing with us how he has embraced the motto, fail fast, learn fast. And when we first started talking about that concept, there was a lot of laughter and giggling and people saying, oh my God, that's, will people come out in public and talk about failure? And we were just convinced every time we spoke with Jake and his team at Nuru that this is exactly the kind of work and the presentation and inspiration that we all need to do the important mission-based work that faces us and that we're so honored to be able to do here in our community in Lake County. So in his journey, Fail Fast, Learn Fast, Jake has built an award-winning international nonprofit. He's mobilized people across cultures, borders, politics, and language to reach their full potential. And we're so excited that he's here tonight to talk about that and to do that with many of you who are in the audience tonight who are coming to tomorrow's workshop. So we're humbled that he accepted our invitation to be the inaugural speaker of the Gorton Greater Good Project, which less than a year ago didn't even exist. So Jake, I guess it's no surprise then that you're clearly a guy who's up for challenges. So we thank you for being our inaugural speaker. And with that, Lake Forest, please welcome Jake Harriman.
Wow, well, it is certainly an honor to be standing here in front of you tonight. I want to thank the Gorton Community Center and the Granger Foundation. Can we all give them another round of applause, please? It's really inspiring for me to see what you all are trying to do with the Greater Good Project, bringing together nonprofit leaders in Chicagoland to really build something special here. I was really inspired and, again, humbled and honored to be invited to be the inaugural speaker. So tonight we're going to talk about something that we often don't like to talk about. We often don't like to put out in the public. We often don't like to put in the press, and that's about failure. And I can tell you that I have been in the past the king of failure, unfortunately. My whole adult life has been about leadership, and all that means is that I've made every possible mistake as a leader. And I've learned a lot from those leadership mistakes. And one of the things I've learned most about is this concept of taking failure and embracing it and being able to learn from it, to grow your organization, to be able to iterate quickly to meet the demands of an ever-changing market or an ever-changing population that we're trying to serve as nonprofit leaders. So tonight what I thought I would do is I want to tell you a little bit about my journey, my personal journey, my life story, what got me into this business, what got me into this line of work. I want to tell you a little bit about some key lessons that I have learned from failure. What happened, how I learned from that, and what I hope you might be able to walk away from tonight as an application of that lesson. And then I thought we could finish with a little bit of Q&A at the end, in case you have any kind of burning questions remaining that I'd love to be able to share my experiences with you. Does that sound okay to everybody? Yes. Okay, great, good. So we'll start with where I grew up. And this is good because we're learning about failure right now. My clicker is not working. There we go, okay. I grew up in a small town, actually a small community called the Wetzel Settlement in rural Appalachia, a little farm in West Virginia. And so we grew up in poverty by American standards. We were poor. But I never knew that as a kid. My parents were incredible, as I'm sure a lot of the parents in this room are. And I learned a lot of lessons growing up about the importance of hard work, of determination. I learned a lot about the power of imagination. I learned a lot about the power of perseverance. And there was one incident in particular, a lesson that I learned very early on as a child. I was probably about 6 or 7, a story with my father that I wanted to share with you that really kind of shaped and molded me in the beginning. So how many people here actually grew up on a farm? Okay, good. There's about 6 of us. That's great. So one of the things that you do on a farm, for the other 98% of the people in the room, is you got to build fence around your farm. And typically that's to keep out cows and other animals from eating your crops that you're growing. So my father and I were building fence line. And so we had dug a series of post holes around the property, and were proceeding to basically set these posts, these locust posts, which are about 8 feet high, and you got to set them firmly into the ground. And the only way to do that is with a sledgehammer, and they're very tall. So what my dad would do is we'd back the pickup truck up against the fence post, And we'd hold the fence post. My dad would, he'd swing the sledgehammer and hammer the post into the ground. Well, I mean, I was 6, and so I was not going to be able to hold the sledgehammer, obviously, or swing it. And so what was my job? Well, I was the guy at the bottom holding the post like this as my dad was swinging that thing with all his might up above me. So I'm 6, and naturally I'm a little bit afraid. So after about the 5th post that we set, I kind of collapsed in fear and anxiety and started sobbing and ran away and kept saying, "Dad, I can't do this anymore. I'm so scared." And my dad, very uncharacteristic for me, normally he would just call me a wimp and tell me to get back on the post. He actually got down from the truck, sat me down on the tailgate, and he looked at me firmly and said, "Son, I never want to hear you say those 2 words ever again. I can't." He said, "You can do anything in this world that you want to do, but you just have to put your mind to it and persevere past challenges." And it's funny, that sounds like a really simple, silly story. Those stories happen every day of our life. But for some reason, that story stuck with me my entire life. Now, since that time, I have experienced challenges. They're a little tougher than getting a sledgehammer swung over your head in a fence post. But that story, that lesson has resonated with me my whole life. And what happens to us as children at a very young age, and for parents in the room, this is so important, I think, for our kids. Things that you say, sayings that you come up with, trying to help your children, that will stick with us. It sticks with us. It sticks with us our whole life, and it helps us get through some really tough challenges, as it has to me in my life. And it has helped me get through some of the worst failures that I've ever come across in my life. So from rural West Virginia, I then went to the Naval Academy. So this is me looking like a dork in my little sailor cap on what's called Induction Day, which is one of the worst days in history. You basically say goodbye to everybody that loves you, go into that hallowed hall that's actually a prison, and people start screaming at you. And the next thing you do, you're in a pool of sweat doing push-ups until you can't feel your arms. So I was at the Naval Academy, and I had a great time there playing rugby and studied systems engineering. And while I was at the Naval Academy is it's an incredible leadership lab. You have all these different leaders that you can learn from, their successes, their failures, and you get a lot of opportunities to try out different types of leadership that you can learn from. While I was at the Naval Academy, I ended up learning a lot of very valuable lessons about leadership. And what was impressive, I began to understand and began to see was I began to learn more from my failures as a leader at the Academy than I did my successes. Now, what was important at this stage of my life was those failures did not come at a significant cost. I was still in a very safe bubble, right? I talked about a leadership lab. The risk was not that high. The consequences were not that great for failure. So that allowed me to begin testing and pushing the envelope on what was possible, trying new ideas and new things, and really starting to embrace this concept that failure all the time is not that bad. So I graduated the Naval Academy, and I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. I became a platoon commander in the infantry in a special operations unit called Force Recon. That's me, the big ugly guy in the middle, who's covered with mud. And while I was in the service, I was deployed lots of different places around the world, did several tours of combat in Iraq, Horn of Africa, several other places in the Middle East. And while I was in, I began to see this really disturbing connection between the desperation that extreme poverty was creating in a lot of these places that we were working, and how it was fueling the growth and stability of a lot of the violent extremist groups that had begun to form at that time, that later became known as all the names we know today: Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Shabaab, etc. And I began to see, I had some pretty intense experiences over and over and over again that began to show me this. I began to see that, my guys and I began to see that these groups, these extremist groups, were actually doing development work and aid in these villages. A lot of you probably don't know this. ISIS has their own aid agency called the ISIS Relief Society. They actually do food distribution, they build schools, they build medical clinics. And of course, they're also terribly oppressive, and they terrorize the population. But many times, these farmers have no other options. They have no alternatives. And we begin to experience this really disturbing connection between the spread of terrorism and violent extremism and the desperation of poverty. And one instance in particular that caused this awakening in me. See, I was on a very different path in life. As a special operator, I was on a career to kind of do that field for the rest of my career before I was launched in this different path. And it really took something to shake me to the core to get me out of that. And that was during the early days of the invasion. So in 2003, many of you probably remember the Iraqi invasion. We were one of the leading Marine Corps units, and our job was to move through southern Iraq and take Baghdad and cause the regime to fall, while the army kind of swept around to the west to be able to seize the airfield in Baghdad. And southern Iraq at the time was one of the poorest places in the world. There was a terrible food security problem, no access to healthcare, education for the kids, very desperate situation because Saddam was oppressing the Shia population in the south. And what had been happening was, as we moved through the south, the regular Iraqi army was retreating to make a final stand in Baghdad. But Saddam was pushing his special forces guys, his Fedayeen soldiers, south. And they were going hut to hut in these rural villages, coercing these poor farmers to fight us. Basically saying, look, your kids are starving right in front of you. If you pick up this weapon and go fight these guys 10 miles south of here, we'll drop a bag of rice off here for your kids every other week. Now, you might think that's kind of a raw deal, but we were fighting those guys by the hundreds and thousands. And that kind of set the stage for what happened in this one particular morning. So the first major contact of the war was a place called Nasiriyah, the Battle of Nasiriyah. And we had been told by intelligence that the city had surrendered, but as we moved into the city, we quickly realized it had not. And we got ambushed, started taking heavy casualties. We were able to push through the city and form a defensive perimeter north of Nasiriyah, where we had to dig in and wait for our combat supplies. And we essentially had to wait. And I'll tell you, there's nothing worse than sitting still and waiting in combat. We were all tired, hungry, and really scared. Anybody who tells you they're not scared in combat is either lying or absolutely crazy, okay? Everyone's scared. So I got up on my fighting hole and I started walking the lines to check on my guys because I knew as the fog lifted, it was about 4 in the morning, and I knew the sun was coming up. As the fog lifted, they were going to start shooting at us again. So I was walking the lines, checking on my guys, and as I was doing that, I looked up on the road and I saw this small white car racing toward our position from the north. So they just started using suicide bombing as a tactic. I thought this guy's loaded explosives in his car, he's going to blow himself up. So I grabbed 3 of my guys, we took off running to stop the car. I fired a warning shot across the front of the car. Finally, the car stops about 50 meters out. The man hops out from the driver's side, starts waving his arms frantically and running at me. And so I'm yelling at him in Arabic to get him on the ground. I think he's strapped a bomb himself at this point. And he's not listening. He's still running at me. As I lift my weapon up, and I think I have to take this guy out, I look behind him, and I see a large black military truck roll up behind his little white car. 6 guys in black jump out, run up into the car, and they start shooting into the car. So this man stops dead in his tracks, starts screaming, turns around, and starts running back to the car. And that's when I realized what was happening. You see, this man was just one of those poor farmers who was trying to escape across our lines of safety with his family because he didn't want to fight. So I yelled at my guys to take out the Fedayeen, and I ran as fast as I could to try to save this guy's family. But by the time I got there, it was too late. I looked in the passenger side. His wife had been shot in the face and in the chest. She was slumped over dead. He had a little infant baby girl in the back whose arm had been shot off, and she'd been shot in the head. And he was cradling the body of his little 6-year-old daughter who had been shot in the stomach, and she was choking on her own blood. And in that moment, the whole war slowed down for me. And I put myself in this man's shoes. And I thought, it's not fair. You know, I live in a world of choices. What school do I want to go to for grad school? Where do I want my kids to grow up? What were this man's choices when he woke up this morning? You know, he could watch his kids starve to death. He could strap a bomb on himself, make some desperate attempt to cross our lines. He didn't have any choices. And for the first time in my military career, I didn't know what to do. I'd been trained for everything. I had not been trained for this. And I put my weapon at my side, and I just started crying with this guy. then I got really, really angry. You know, it wasn't fair that the GPS coordinates of a man's birthplace dictates what choices he had in this world. And that was the beginning for me of a very powerful awakening, a very powerful conversation that started to happen in my platoon. And over the next 2 years of combat, we started talking about this problem because we saw the same thing again and again and again. We began to realize that, you know, poverty doesn't cause terrorism or violent extremism, but it does enable it to thrive. It does enable it to grow. That people who are recruited into the ranks many times don't have any choices. They don't have any other alternatives. And a lot of times, that woman who's strapping a bomb to herself and running at me is not doing it out of some kind of misplaced sense of hatred for the West. She's doing it out of love for that 5-year-old son and 3-year-old daughter who are home starving to death. And as we continued to have this conversation, my guys and I talked about what we saw as a market gap, a new need. You know, there were guys like us, operators, who were working in these places doing what we call village stabilization operations, trying to help. But honestly, we were trained to take out targets. We were not trained to help farmers increase crop yields. And then there were aid workers on the other side, well-intentioned people who were trying to do good work, but many times their efforts were relief, very short-term, handouts. They were not sustainable. And a lot of them, unfortunately, were getting kidnapped and killed. What we saw a need for was a hybrid way, a third way of development. What if we could build an economic development model for these rural communities that could be long-lasting, that can empower these villages out of extreme poverty, not for a day or a week or a year, but permanently? And what if we could staff those projects with former operators like myself, who know how to handle ourselves in uncertain, chaotic environments like we see in combat? And that was the genesis of what became Nauru International. That was the idea. So I made one of the toughest choices I'd ever had to at that point. I left my guys. I left the Marine Corps with their full backing to try to strike out on this path to build something, to build an organization that could really build this third way, this hybrid way, to help eradicate extreme poverty in some of the most violent, unstable areas around the world. So I got out and full of fire, ready to go to build this thing, all excited, quickly realized I have no idea what I'm doing. I mean, I had an engineering degree from the Naval Academy, which honestly meant nothing because I had never used it once. I forgot everything about engineering, and which did not apply to this field I was going into. I was not a Peace Corps guy. I was not a development economist. So, you know, I didn't give up. Instead, I just decided, you know, I'm going to devote a year and a half of my life to researching this problem. So I started studying all the models out there, what's working, what's not working, and why, and began to build some ideas about how we could take on this problem. And I had to pay my rent. I didn't have any money. You know, I was out of the Marine Corps now, and I had to pay my rent. So I wanted to have enough time to do my research and build these ideas. So I ended up, you do what you can. So I drove a seafood delivery truck, delivering seafood up and down the coast, San Diego, Orange County, LA, and I was the best truck driver ever. To this day, I still think it's the best job I ever had. But it bought me time. It allowed me to actually build these ideas. And at first, you know, there's a lot of good people in this world doing good things. I wanted to join another organization and build and use my ideas to help build from within. But there was one problem. Nobody wanted to hire me. And I didn't have the skill set everybody was looking for. They looked at my resume and they're like, you're trained to kill people, not help people, you know? So that was kind of a problem. So I just decided, you know what? Screw those guys. I'm going to build my own thing. So I applied to Stanford. I wanted to go to business school. I wanted to build a company that could really address this problem on a global scale. I didn't want to start a little project that was going to help a couple people. I'd changed my entire life to go into this field. I wanted to have a global impact. So I wanted to go to business school, and I'd heard that Stanford and Harvard are good. Honestly, I didn't put any thought in it more than that. Filled out all their silly essays and their applications, and honestly kind of forgot about it and just kind of submitted them. And by some miracle got in. I don't know whether it was like the fish guy quota or how that worked out, but I got in, and I decided to go to Stanford. That's a picture of Highway 7, where I met that man. Decided to go to Stanford Business School, and at Stanford, pretty amazing thing happened. Over 30 of my classmates rallied around me around this idea to build this new company and this new organization. 6 faculty members came on board with seed funding, mentorship, and advice. And more importantly, I began to be introduced to a concept called design thinking at Stanford. Has anybody ever heard of that concept, design thinking? Yeah, several hands go up in the audience. Design thinking is a very powerful methodology used by a lot of the tech companies in Silicon Valley. It allows them to rapidly design new products that meet an ever-changing market demand. So what they're able to do, it keeps them out in front of their competitors because they're constantly changing their product to meet the demands of the market. It allowed them to grow these companies really quickly to become, multi-billion-dollar companies. And it was very simple. It's about understanding the need of the customer. It's about throwing some ideas out there like crazy called rapid prototyping and just see what sticks. And then once you get that data back, whatever's failing, get rid of it. Whatever's working, build on it, iterate, okay? Very simple concept. And so I thought, Stanford guys are pretty smart. I should probably take these ideas and maybe I can use them in what I'm doing with the nonprofit space. Little did I know that's not something that most people in the nonprofit space are used to. So I started kind of building on these ideas, and over time, we began to build a pretty special model, and something that really the world had never seen. We began to build this new locally led, sustainable, integrated approach to eradicating poverty in these really remote areas. So I graduated from the business school in June of 2008, and we'd raised about $500,000 at that point. Shockingly, I still don't know how that happened. And then I moved to one of the poorest areas in Kenya in the southwest, a place called the Kuria District. And over the next 7 years of development, we began in Kenya, and began to see some really powerful, innovative success and progress in the project. And over the next 7 years, we built a multi-million-dollar organization. We're now a $7 million organization with a global staff of 300 people, Kenyans, Ethiopians, and Americans all over the world. And we've now empowered over 85,000 people permanently out of extreme poverty in Kenya, and many more, and more now also in Ethiopia. And the amazing thing for me in this journey has been that now that we have a model that's working, a lot of people ask me all the time, why did you start in Kenya? You had this idea in Iraq. It's not like Kenya is like an active war zone. Well, when I was at the business school, I had a really great professor who's become a mentor who advised me. He said, look, your model is a very new approach. You don't want to take something like that, a new approach, untested, and just drop it into chaos, okay? Put it into a country that's a little more politically stable, a little safer, prove that it works to the world first, and then take it into a conflict zone. So essentially, the last 7 years have been about me chomping at the bit, trying to get this thing into a conflict state, while my investors and team have been like pulling me back. Finally, now the model's proven and we're ready to go. And so I'm happy to say we're getting ready to take our model for the first time into conflict states. I just got back from Mogadishu 2 weeks ago, where we're investigating a project in southern Somalia to disrupt the operations of Al-Shabaab. The first week in May, I'm going to be heading to northeast Nigeria to look at a project site that we might start there to disrupt Boko Haram. So we're looking to take on some pretty good challenges moving forward. But through this time, as we have built, I want to talk a little bit about one of the core things that brought you all here tonight, and that's this ethos of fail fast, learn fast. It's a concept I first learned at the Naval Academy, then reinforced at Stanford Business School, and then as I got into the field, found it was very powerful. It's become one of our core values. And what we found is if you can build a team and build a culture that embraces failure, not tries to go out and fail all the time, don't get me wrong. You don't want to go out there and just fail all over the place because you're not going to get anything done. But when failures happen, you have to build a culture that receives and accepts failure, equips your people to be able to make this decentralized decision making, to be able to make decisions on their own and mess up sometimes. We morbidly have a saying, give your people enough rope to hang themselves, which, allow them to make mistakes so that they're not unrecoverable. But then the key is learn from them and never make the same mistake again. So what I want to talk to you about tonight, I want to talk to you about 3 key lessons that I've learned over the last 7 years. We actually put out a paper. If any of you are interested, we're very passionate about this. We're very transparent about our failures. You can go to our website. There's a tab that says transparency, and there's a 45-page document that describes most of the larger failures we had in Kenya over the last 7 years, and what we learned from them, how you can learn from them and not repeat the same mistakes. And I encourage you to do the same for your organizations as well. So let's talk about some failures. This first failure I want to talk about is about a well project that we did. Many times what I find in this industry, in the nonprofit space, is that people get really excited about trendy projects, about trendy ideas. What's the sexy idea? What's the new thing out there that we can all get involved in and get people excited? Mostly our donors, to be honest, right? I mean, we're all chasing money. We're all trying to build our organizations. And so too many times we get trapped in the thinking that we need to be designing programs, we need to be building programs to meet our donors' needs. Or even worse, when we sit alone and quiet at night, to make ourselves feel good, right? And I will tell you that that's the worst place to design from. But too many projects get caught up in we want to feel good, we want to be able to touch and feel our projects, we want to put our name on it, we want it to be concrete, tangible, we want to be able to say I delivered X number of dollars and built this many building blocks in this country. And I can show you concretely a picture and a GPS coordinate where that is, okay? Well, that's what happened with our well project. We had this great idea we drilled 8 deep wells in the communities we were operating in. There was a terrible water shortage where we operated. And we decided, hey, there's this great idea. Little kids couldn't go to school because they had to walk 2 hours to find water, bring it back to their home, they couldn't go to school. So hey, why don't we drill deep wells at the schools? The kids can bring the buckets to schools, fill them up with the water, at the end of the day, bring them home, right? Sounds like a great idea. And by the way, we can put all these beautiful pictures on the website. We can tell the donors, here's the GPS coordinate of the well. It costed $15,000, which has this ROI over the next 5 years, blah, 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 et cetera, right? Well, that's all good in theory until you start thinking about the sustainability of the project. What we failed to think about was, number one, those pumps are going to break. They're going to break at a minimum. You know, the best case scenario is going to be 1.5 years. When those pumps break, who's going to fix them? Who's going to pay for them? Well, we had this smart idea in place called fee for use. We were going to charge the villagers a fee to be able to use the water. Well, there's another problem called lack of population density. There simply were not enough people in that area to be able to cover the costs of that well repair over time. So that was the first problem. The other problem after that was the fact that it's contamination. Yes, the water was clean at the well, but the little girls, as they were carrying those buckets home, had their hands in the water, and their hands were covered sometimes with feces, sometimes with other germs that was getting in the water. By the time they got home, it was contaminated again. So we had failed to do our extensive research. We failed to actually listen to the community who would have told us those things in the first place. We came in with our big brains from Stanford thinking these are the greatest ideas since sliced bread without even asking the community what they thought. We learned a powerful, powerful lesson from this. And I want to bring this home for you all here as well. Don't chase sexy products, okay? No matter how much donors want you to start an initiative, because it's going to, you know, and donors are very well intentioned as well. They want to make a difference in the world as well, but they're not the experts. You and the communities that you're working with are the experts, and you need to be driving the change, and you need to be driving the product design. Don't chase sexy trends, okay? Because what happens in the end is the communities suffer. The very people that you're trying to help are the ones who suffer. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two is about hiring. So this is really amazing. One of my heroes, Philip Mahochi. This man was my partner in Kenya. He's the guy I started New Kenya with. Really incredible guy who grew up in extreme poverty, moved back to his community to serve the people there, and over time helped me build this massive organization. When we first went into this project, we were working in a marginalized tribe called the Kuria tribe in southwest Kenya. It makes up 0.5% of the population in Kenya. Our idea was that we need to go in and hire only locals from that tribe to staff all the ranks, all the way up through the senior ranks in the organization. Because the idea sounded it seemed pretty sound. We wanted to make sure that there was trust and buy-in in the leadership. Trust is needed in these programs, no matter where you are, no matter what community you operate in, you want to have that trust and buy-in. And who better to build that trust than people who come from that community? It makes a lot of sense. What we found as the company grew was there were not enough qualified people in that area as the company grew to a bigger and bigger company to be able to manage and scale that company properly. They were not qualified. But we continued to force locals from that tribe into those positions. And what happened? Nepotism creeps in, corruption creeps in. People are not qualified for their jobs, and things begin to fall apart. And who gets blamed? The very people that you're actually trying to help. Okay, so we actually had to take a radically different approach, do a nationwide search to find top talent in the country, in Kenya, and bring them in to help out with some of the other management positions to begin to really scale the company up to the level that we wanted it to go. So the real lesson here about this, as I bring this back to you guys, is, has anybody ever heard of Jim Collins, Good to Great? Has anybody ever read that book? Jim Collins has this great saying, make sure you have the right people on the bus, right? Make sure you have the right people on the bus, and make sure those people are in the right seats. You can never invest enough in your team. Team is everything. A company is only as good as the team that you hire. And don't be afraid to wait for the right person. Don't think that, don't try to pigeonhole all the people in your organization have to be of this demographic. All the people of your organization have to fit this exact mold. You need diversity in your organization. Diversity of thought will generate much more creative ideas and will enable you to meet your mission much more quickly. You got to have the right people on the bus. And there's another saying, hire slow, fire fast. Okay? When you're looking for new positions in your organization, take the time to find the right people to get on that bus and be in the right seat. And by the way, if you find out they're not the right person, you got to fire them quickly. Okay? Otherwise, you as a manager and a leader of the organization are going to spend way too much time tied up in dealing with all the management challenges that come with that person. Okay, so team. Make sure you have the right team. Make sure you're careful in hiring. And another thing that we learned here through this process, it's not just in our Kenyan organization either. We took that home to our international organization, our American organization as well. What we have learned is you got to hire for culture fit. Okay, culture is extremely important. There's a saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? You guys have probably heard that as well. I'm using all these like sayings, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's really true. Culture is so critically important. If you make the wrong hires for culture and that person's a bad fit, they're going to become a cancer in your organization. And the baby that you are building and the love that you have and passion in this organization is going to start falling apart because you made a couple bad hires and that person's not a good culture fit. It's not their fault, okay? It's your fault for making that wrong hire. So one technique that we use that might be helpful for you, we have what's called a culture interview team. And so the person, as they come through the pipeline to get hired, goes through a series of interviews all the way up through the managing director, the manager for that position. And then you have a culture interview where the people come in to get interviewed. And these are people who have been with the organization for a long time, understand the core values in the organization. And if they think that person is not a fit, they can override the manager and actually reject them from being hired. What that allows you to do is allows you to protect the precious culture in the organization, which I think is one of the utmost things that you as a leader and CEO of your organization it's your job to protect that. Okay, my final lesson I want to talk to you about is about data-driven decision-making. Data-driven decision-making. In Kenya, we built this robust monitoring and evaluation system. So when you design programs, you want to be able to answer the question, not just for your donors, but for yourself, is it working? Is what we're building working? So we built out, again, this is the arrogance that I had coming out of Stanford. I wish I could beat myself with the 2-before and go back and start over. But we built this huge composite index of how we were going to measure poverty levels. I think it had like 170 different indicators that fed into this beast. And it was this crazy mathematical equation. Well, what it resulted in was a 2-hour-long survey that these poor villagers had to go through. And that our poor team, our staff were going around. I mean, these guys were exhausted. They might get 3 interviews done in a day, and by the way, there's 300 they have to do. So not only was this ineffective, but everybody hated us by the end of this thing. Well, what we learned is that, yes, information is important. And this is not just a silly story. Information is important. However, there is such a thing as too much information. What I've found over time is you want to be able to make informed, data-driven decisions as you grow your organization, as you design your programs, but you want the information coming back from the market, from your partners, from your beneficiaries to be as accurate and simple as possible. If you can streamline the data that's coming back from your projects, you can streamline your decision making. You can make much more quick decisions. You can iterate on your programs more effectively and more rapidly to keep you ahead of the curve and ensure that the people you're trying to serve are getting served properly. Okay? Keep it simple. You've heard of another business saying, keep it simple, stupid, right? Well, I'm the stupid they created that saying around. So the idea is you really want to keep some very simple indicators and metrics from your programs that measure, are you having the impact that you're trying to have? At Nuru, we have a very complex model. It has four different, you have agriculture, financial inclusion, health, education, leadership. We have a for-profit side of what we do, but we have shrunk everything down to one dashboard that fits on a single page. And that's what we report to our donors, and that's what we report to ourselves to make sure what we're doing is adequate. And you know what? A lot of this is about educating your donors. I hear all the time from nonprofit leaders, well, my donors are telling me I have to do this and that. Okay, well, you begin to work with them, educate them, okay? That's our job. We are the experts in the field working with our population that we're trying to serve. So help them see, these are the key indicators that we need to be tracking to see, is this working or is it not working? It's a very important lesson. You know, and as I think about, so that kind of brings it home. The lesson there really is when you're thinking about data-driven decision making, when you're thinking about informed decision making, make sure that it's simple. Keep it as clean as possible. You want to measure what you're doing. That's very important, but make sure it's simple. Make sure the data coming back from the field is very simple. When I think about these lessons that we have learned over the years, like I said, we've made so many mistakes. I could stand up here all night and bore you all to tears with all the different mistakes that I've made. But you know, what I keep coming back to is I keep coming back to the fact that it's important as leaders to push through, persevere through failure. And it's important for leaders to build an organization that actually embraces that failure sometimes as a positive and learn from it. One of the techniques to do that is actually build a culture of feedback. As a leader, sometimes the thing that's the hardest thing to do is to be able to be told what you're doing is wrong, what you're doing is broken, your leadership tactic sucks. Okay? But it's important to be receiving feedback from the field and your team so that we can always be learning as leaders. When you build a culture of feedback like that, they will tell you that the emperor has no clothes on, which, by the way, you want them to tell you, because if they're not telling you, if the people you're working with are not giving you feedback, the very solutions you're trying to implement in the field are going to be actually damaging the population that you're trying to serve. So build that culture of feedback. Accept mistakes when you make them. Admit your mistakes when you make them. You will build so much trust and buy-in with your staff and the population that you're serving if you simply will admit your mistakes. And then don't ever make them again. Iterate on them. So in my closing here, I want to leave you with three thoughts that will help you see how, think about this concept of fail fast, learn fast when it applies to your own organization. The first one is failure is normal. It happens all the time. And actually, it's necessary for innovation to happen. You know, if without failure, we're going to keep down this track. This is what happens. This is what I see happen all the time with these large NGOs. They get on this very singular track, heading down this road, and it's like a big ocean liner, right? How hard is it to turn an ocean liner? It's really hard. You have to get the whole thing turning, right? So think about your organization as a little speedboat, zipping around, easily able to turn, very adaptive, very able to change to the environment. The way you do that is by being able to fail quickly, learn from that failure, and redesign your solutions and innovate past that challenge. So failure is normal and necessary for innovation. Second, invite others into the conversation. Don't think as the CEO, you're the only one who has to harbor all this information and solve all the problems. That is a sure path to failure and one you're not going to learn from, okay? You need to build a team around you that can help you with this problem, with the failures. Build a collaborative where you look at your failures systematically over time, and as a team, you learn from them. You begin to think about how do you rebuild solutions based on the failures that you have experienced in the past. So learn not just from your team, but from the people that you're serving and also from your donors. Get good feedback from your donors as well. And finally is do something with this. Do something with your failure. And what I mean by that is sometimes as leaders, we get really down on ourselves about failure. We get in this position where we just think that, if number one, if we admit our failures, funding is going to dry up, staff are going to leave, and the people that we're working with are going to lose confidence in us. Well, what I've found in my experience, and that does happen sometimes, but what I've found in my experience over the long haul, all three of those are lies. You can talk to and educate your investors, your donors, your donor population. For the most part, especially the ones who have been there with you in the beginning, they're with you in the long haul. They're true stakeholders in what you're trying to build. And honestly, many times when you're telling them the truth and you're being transparent about your failures, it's very refreshing. It's authentic. When I go to my donors and I talk to them, well, I really screwed this up this time, we have a good laugh about it. And they say, and then they get really serious. They don't ever do that again. But we'll laugh in the beginning. The same thing's true of your team. If you're authentic and you admit your mistakes to your team, you get a lot of trust and buy-in from your team. And finally, to the very people we're serving. When we drilled those wells and we ended up hurting the community, the best thing I ever did was go out there and talk to the chiefs and the village elders in those villages and apologize and say the biggest mistake I'd made was I never came out and I didn't listen to you about this. I never asked your opinion about it. And we got so much buy-in from that. We got so much of a warm response and got so tight with the community, and they began to give us great feedback that allowed us to really iterate and design really, really effective solutions after that mistake. So just to sum up, I really want to encourage you tonight. I always look back to my dad who on swinging that sledgehammer, about to hit me in the head with that thing. And the lesson that he taught me on the tailgate of that truck, never give up. It was very encouraging for me to be able to persevere through my failures throughout my life. And then again, through my fellow Stanford students and the faculty there and our investors that have encouraged me over the years to be able to push past my failures in the field as we've been building Nuru. As nonprofit leaders, guys, this is hard. What we're trying to do is hard. The challenges and the problems that you are facing and trying to design past are some of the toughest ones that the world faces today. You're not just trying to make money. You're trying to solve some tough problems. What we're doing is hard. So I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you tonight, persevere. The fight is worth it. If a dumb hillbilly like me can get to where I got and build an organization like we have been able to accomplish, anybody can. So I want to encourage you about that tonight. Build a culture, build an organization that embraces failure. Build an organization that is resilient and learns from failures along the way. By doing that, you're going to be able to take your game and your team to a whole new level. And as a team, you're going to be able to accomplish things that you never, ever dreamed were possible. Thank you.
Executive Director here at Gorton, and I am so pleased to have been here tonight to hear this, and so pleased to be here with all of you. We're going to start our question and answer period now. We're going to bring the lights up so that we can see the crowd, and we have two people in the two aisles. We have Tricia over here and Mercy over here. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and they will come around and we'll do a question and answer. I also want to encourage you all to take pictures and share on social media. Hashtag Greater Good Project. Tell us what you think, give us feedback, and let us hear all about it.
This is wonderful. I spend a lot of time in East Africa, so everything you say resonates with me, and a lot of truth to it. And I'm curious about what you're doing in Mogadishu. You said you're starting something there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So what we're doing right now is we are just investigating a potential project site. So the idea is we want to actually try to work potentially in southern Somalia, in either the lower Shabelle or the Juba River Valley near Kismayo or Baidoa inter-riverine area, where there's heavy influence of al-Shabaab, or al-Shabaab control. The goal is actually, again, it's about creating and empowering people with lasting, meaningful choices. We want to provide alternatives through the Nuru model and approach in these remote rural areas for the villages and the villagers and the communities to be able to resist the violent extremist groups, resist al-Shabaab. Instead of allowing them to come in and use the villages as base of operations, base of support, recruiting from the villages because these people have no other options, al-Shabaab distributing food aid, in these places. We want to be able to provide alternatives, lasting alternatives to them. So one of the project sites we're potentially looking at are in those locations in southern Somalia.
Well, could you talk a little bit about some things that worked? So maybe the basic strategy of Nuru
Sure.
and what they do?
So really quickly, what Nuru does, and then I'll tell you what I think is the secret sauce about what makes it work. It's a locally led, integrated, sustainable approach. So what that means, I'll break that down. Integrated, we do agriculture, financial inclusion, health, and education programs. That's the core of our model. And integrated solutions make a lot of sense. If you just increase crop yields and fight hunger, the kids are still dying from malaria or waterborne illnesses. And so the family has to sell the food they just raised. Again, now they're back and hungry again. So integrated solutions make sense. The challenge is nobody's ever figured out how to make them sustainable or scalable. And that's really where our kind of special IP comes in. We have a really robust leadership program that equips local leaders with the skills they need to co-create these programs with us. So they really own the programs. Once we leave, they continue scaling them. As they break, they fix them because they help build them. And the second component is we build a for-profit company that's separate. And as it's legally structured, so as it grows over time, the profits from that have to be diverted back in to pay for the ongoing costs of the nonprofit. So the whole thing becomes totally self-sustaining and independent of philanthropy over time. Well, you asked about what works. I will tell you, in my experience, what works the most effectively is investing in leaders, focusing on leaders. There's a lot of great agriculture models out there. There's a lot of great health models. It's important to get the right approaches. And honestly, we don't design those from scratch. We steal everybody else's stuff. I mean, why not, right? There's a lot of really good stuff out there. Why duplicate effort? And we work with those guys. We don't really steal their stuff. So we actually pull those models in and work with them. But the key we found is we've developed a philosophy, a process, and a curriculum to unlock the potential of local leaders over time to be able to design these solutions and scale them effectively.
Yeah, I have a question. There's a lot of leaders of non-for-profits just through the startup phase that are asked to create strategic plans for their organization. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that, if your stakeholders have asked you to create a strategic plan and a vision for your growth over the next 10 years, and what kind of advice you would give for non-for-profits that are either trying to transform themselves or just once they've stabilized into their core mission, just what their future would look like over the next 10 years.
Yes, investors want to see a strategic plan for sure. And you're going to make a strategic plan. And the week after you make it and you get the money, you're going to rip it up and you're going to throw it away, because everything's going to change within the first week. However, I will tell you that one of the most powerful things I believe about the strategic planning, about a strategic plan, is the process of writing the plan. So, as you're building a team in a startup, for any company, for-profit or nonprofit, as you're building that team, creating the process to design the strategy, set milestones, set goals for the team, hold yourself accountable for that, build a timeline to be able to hit those goals, setting activities in place and budget to allocate according to be able to hit those milestones. All those exercises are very important for a team as you grow. Now, and honestly, investors understand that. They know that your process is going to change. They just want to know, is this guy or gal thinking far enough ahead to really be smart enough to anticipate some challenges that they might hit along the road? They know the plan is going to change. They're not investing in what's going to happen at month 7, exactly, and you're going to hit that milestone. But what they want to know is what your process is in place. Are you able to understand the market enough to even build a plan? And honestly, most entrepreneurs in the beginning are not. They don't understand enough. And I will tell you as entrepreneurs too, or nonprofit leaders, that's a great question. Entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders, if you're building something new, make sure you're building something for a true market gap. If it's already out there, join that other person, okay? There's too many I tried to do that. Nobody would hire me, okay? But try to join somebody else. And the reason I'm saying that is because there's limited capital in this world to fund the good work that everyone is doing. If you begin to introduce new ideas that compete directly with someone else who's doing the exact same thing, you're making it harder for everybody. So if you want to build something, do your research, make sure there's an actual market gap there, and build into that market gap. And I'm sorry, I digress from your point. But hopefully, was that helpful? Okay. I'm happy to actually give you some templates and whatnot. We had to build we build strategic plans. We have a process there, and I'm happy to pass it on to you afterwards.
You were talking
Sorry,
about
where are you at?
Sorry, I stand up here.
Got
You
it.
were talking about when you were hiring, that you have a process, and at the end of it, you have this group of people that are kind of the culture
Interview team.
interview team.
Yeah.
And what I don't understand, I understand the concept of it, but in any given institution, the culture changes over time. So within that group, are you getting a big demographic? Because the culture of whether it's a school or if it's even Gorton, at one point was a school, then it's a community center, then it's, and all these evolve. So who's in charge of that group that gets that big veto?
Well, so the way I would say, so if you have an executive team for your organization, as an executive team, try to define right here and now what are our cultural, what is our culture? What are our core values that we all align with? Don't worry about the past necessarily. Okay? If you've been an ever-evolving organization, try to understand where are we at right now, where we're trying to go in the next 5 years. Try to build out and understand what the core culture is that you want to create in the organization, and that is, that you want in the team that you currently have, and then hire for that. Because you're right, a lot of organizations change over time, and that's a natural evolution for organization. But what happens as the culture changes, most of the people who were there in the old days, when it was the old culture, either are forced to leave or they leave on their own. Because they begin to understand they're not a good fit anymore for where the organization is going. And that's healthy for organizations as they grow. As you grow, sometimes if the culture changes significantly, then some of the early people who were part of a different culture, they're just not a good fit anymore. And like I said before, that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean they're bad operators or bad performers. It just means they're not a good culture fit. So as an executive team, try to understand and define very clearly what are our core values, what do we want to stand for, and how do we build a culture that reinforces that? And really that starts with people. I would encourage you to read some great articles from Harvard Business Review and some other places about building team culture. We have some stuff on our website you can go to and look what our cultures are about, what are our core values. But then what you do is you choose people to sit on that interview panel who really represent that culture, that really embody those core values to the core. And so they're representing the organization, and they have that veto power. It's honestly also a very good protective measure against any kind of nepotism or any kind of favoritism from the senior execs and staff, who sometimes are honestly blinded, not because they have bad intentions, but are blinded by what they personally want. What this allows you to do is make sure that the organization's best interests are represented in that interview panel. Because as the executive team, you're choosing those people on the panel, and you do that through a process to make sure that they do represent the culture of the company. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Hey, hi.
Hi.
Hi, thank you very much for changing from killing people to helping people, because you seem like the kind of person that's really good at whatever you choose to do. I'm grateful that you've chosen to do this other thing. And as I was formulating my question for you, you were kind of answering it in the previous statement that you made about limited amount of dollars and we're all going after the same thing. And my question is, how do you build a collaboration between other agencies? Like, we all want the best for everyone. We all want the same thing. It's not like you're kind of in a different place because you're going like to Africa. We're all in Lake County here.
Yeah.
And we're all trying to help the same population.
Right.
And we want to, I think, collaborate with one another. Do you have any advice for forming partnerships with other not-for-profits?
Sure. That's a great question. And I want to applaud you guys again because, having a collaborative where you have nonprofit leaders from across this region come together and try to do something special in this greater good project, I think is really commendable. And it's something I don't see across the country. So I really think this community that you guys have brought together is a very special thing, and you should be applauded for that. Yes, give yourselves a hand. Yeah. I would say a couple things. One is partnership and collaboration is very, very important. Two, it's not always a good fit. Okay? Don't force partnership. All right? Just because you're all in the same geographic area doesn't mean you should all get together and work together. Now, I don't mean that the wrong way. I learn from every nonprofit leader and, frankly, every lower level staff person that I ever come into contact with, and that's an important attitude and mentality to have. But when you formally partner with another organization, those partnerships can launch you to the next level if a couple things are in place. One, have alignment of values and vision. Okay, make sure that you're on a train traveling in the same direction together. Okay, if you're not, there's going to be serious issues down the road. And what I see too many times is you'll get a group of 5 different nonprofits who say they want to partner because they're in the same industry or whatever it might be. They force that partnership, and you know what happens is everybody wastes an enormous amount of time. They get together and they have meetings and they talk about stuff, and that's it. Okay? But if you're partnering with someone who, if you're partnering with an organization that is very aligned with the direction you're going. And by the way, the other thing you want to check for is understand where you as an organization have gaps. Okay? Your strengths are, know yourself. Here's my strengths, not you, but your organization. Here's our strengths, here's our weaknesses. We're looking for people to fill the weaknesses. This organization's strengths match these weaknesses, let's partner. And our visions align, our values are aligned, our cultures are similar. That's a great partnership. And that's going to take both organizations to the next level to accomplish things you didn't think were possible again. Okay? But don't force partnership. Partnership's great in the right place and right time, and it can be a disaster if it's not the right place and right time.
Can I take just one more question?
Oh, sorry, I'm talking too much. Yeah.
Thank you. It's really exciting to hear how your success is based on good policy, evidence-based best practices, and data. But could you speak to how you navigate the political environment that may not be receptive to those successes?
Sure. Just go rogue. Actually, funny enough, that's one of my biggest failures. I went rogue. I mean, which is really stupid, by the way. When I first started working in Kenya, I had this great idea that, we're gonna, my old job, I was worked in the shadow world, so I thought I could do the same. So I operate under the radar of the government, and that was really, really dumb, because by the time we got big enough, the government saw us as a threat and competition, and they just wanted to shut us down. So government, there are challenges with government, and as in any government, to be honest with you. It could be corruption, it could be issues of control, it could be massive issues of bureaucracy and inefficiency. But whatever government structure is in place, you have to find a way to work within that given structure. And we use actually design thinking to try to work within that structure. So we try to understand, okay, what's the political landscape right now? Here's our goals, here's what we want to achieve. Here's the given structure and obstacles that are in place. Let's brainstorm here a little bit and throw out, again, rapid prototypes. Let's try to figure out ways to navigate those channels. What are people's incentives? What do they want out of this? There's a lot of different things you can do depending on the government. In Ethiopia, it's all about control. They're very controlled, centralized government. They hate any kind of competition from outsiders. So we just align ourselves and try to help the government hit their own goals. Now we do it in a little different way, and we're able to kind of weave in some of our innovations along the way, to make it more effective. But we just give them the credit. Kenya, lots of challenges with corruption. We don't pay bribes. Well, that's a problem if you're in Kenya. So what we do instead is we just came along the government again, and we kind of pulled out that book, the development books, that they have to have all these goals in order to get follow-on aid, et cetera. And they say, look, you guys aren't hitting any of these. We're actually going to come in here. We're going to help you actually hit all these goals. You're going to be the shining star of Nyanza province. You're going to get promoted. You're going to get lots more funding flow into this region. You're going to be able to become MP later. And miraculously, obstacles start disappearing. You're able to do your work. So, I would say, stay true to your morals, stay true to your ethics, stay true to who you are. Don't try to be somebody you're not. But try to be creative and work within the existing political structure. In this country, it's the same thing, right? Think about the craziness of the politics in our country right now, right? We are divided deeply across bipartisan lines, right? Or across partisan lines. So, living within that ridiculous ecosystem, we have to find ways to do what we do to serve our people, effectively. And you have people in government who have good intentions and want to do the same. So try to find common ground and work with those politicians to be able to achieve your goals.